wonderful gentleman who was nice enough to take my question regarding a great film that we just saw. Name the film.
Ford versus Ferrari opens November 15th.
And your name.
Joe Neumeyer with WOR Radio.
He's great. The film is great. What a wonderful time. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
I understand that one of the things that you clicked with in terms of what made Ford do what he did in trying to beat Ferrari was the sense of sensitivity or a little bit of kind of vulnerability that he felt. Is that right? Talk to us a little bit about how that sort of spurred him to kind of go into this challenge with Ferrari.
It was one of the interesting things about the piece for me when I was first reading the script and considering it, because I get asked to play a lot of those guys in suits, and so I looked for something special about it, and I thought it was really interesting in Europe, and the brand was seen as stale and square, perhaps coming off the disaster of the Edsel a few years before, and so there were other factors, but the truth is it did become a question of pride, and I just like the idea that this guy who's this titan of industry, I think at the time the second biggest corporation in America, of course a guy like that is just under such a tremendous burden of legacy. I mean, his grandfather is Henry Ford, and it's his name on the car, and so you can see how that would translate into an insecurity that I could identify with more so than the titan of industry part of it.
Yeah. And Josh, one of the things that I find fascinating about Leo is that he was such a loyalist to Ford, such a, not just to the brand, but obviously to the man himself. Talk to us about that connection, because they obviously had this deep past and a sense of understanding about each other, right?
I do think there's a really wonderful relationship between Ken Miles' character and Carol Shelby's character, and their great friendship and their great desire to do something together, both as friends, but also do something that it was excellent and important. And I think very much my understanding is that Leo Beebe felt this amazing desire for greatness and for the Ford company to be as great and in a position in America as he saw it, which goes down to his whole frustration towards someone like Ken Miles being a bohemian, a beatnik, and the whys in the road of where the country was going at that point in the 60s, and how these men to an extent were a little bit like, not like the FBI per se, but the way that they dressed and the environment that was created at that company was quite extraordinary that way. They saw themselves really as the sort of, in a way, a moral compass of a corporation and American identity. And very much, Beebe had this total, deep friendship with Henry Ford II, and that they were in a tank together in World War II. They were a very specific kind of men, and a specific kind of friendship that drove, the passion that he had for, honestly, in the very end, for that photograph. That photograph, he defended the decision to force that photograph to happen to his deathbed. He wrote articles about it at the very end of his life. I don't think it haunted him. I think what haunted him is that it was seen as being the wrong choice. He thought it was the right choice the whole time.
Just to jump in on that, they used the term Ford man in here, and for those of you too young to remember, it's not the same thing as saying, you're not a Pizza Hut man, or it's not just any corporate brand. Ford man had a real meaning in the culture, which, Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, I mean, there was a real culture around it. Ford man meant something everywhere.
Yeah. In fact, I was going to follow up by asking, because there's a sort of sense that Beebe especially is sort of this bridge between a certain kind of post-war guy, an industrialist guy from the post-war era, and an era when he would have to sort of be kind of toggling in between a counterculture or a culture that was changing, and even the way that in early scenes Beebe has got this tie clip, and in certain ways, and then obviously at Le Mans he's wearing a much more sort of casual thing. He's sort of a bridge between eras, and specifically trying to kind of put a stake in the ground for the era that he came from, right?
No, I think that's an excellent point down to the costume design. I mean, one of my, like, we joke about this, the ways in the character was obviously a lot about hairstyle. Believe it or not, Leo Beebe had this like ridiculous and strange hairstyle, particularly for everybody around him, who all had these, is if you look at every photograph of him, it was this sweeping reverse pompadour. It was so strange, and it's like, I didn't create that. I mean, that's just truly photographically. I was like, what kind of person has that sort of ego? Much less even down to the way he genuinely, my understanding was, felt that America was going the wrong way, and that down to that, I think, wonderful scene with John Bernthal playing Coco, where he talks about, like, and Henry Ford says it, well, James Bond is a beatnik, like, they were like, these are not the way this country should be going, and I think that's also what's quite interesting about this, race car movie, is that it's really not about that to an extent for Jim Mangold, the director. It was very much about something way bigger in terms of obviously the friendship elements, but even down to these really interesting historical moments in terms of where the country was and where this company was and where these men were and where things were going.
In fact, Beebe even carried like a note in his wallet.
Questions, if you don't mind. First, Josh, I love the film. Everyone was fantastic. You always are so sweet in every film. I love you. I really hated you in this. So how do you feel? Did you enjoy this character? Did you like playing this scumbag?
The question is whether Josh enjoyed playing a character that
And then,
is an antagonist.
Right, and then quickly, next, Mr. Ford, you were great. You seemed to be almost crying and laughing when you were in the car. Was it a combination? Those are my two quick
It
questions.
was an
And
amazing
then it's
scene,
about whether
by the way.
Tracy's crying and laughing in the car.
That was just bad acting in my opinion. Being a villain, obviously. It's great fun, and at the same time, I think look, we had this really interesting Q&A with Jim Mangold and Christian Bale and Matt and everyone the other night, and Matt and Jim was saying how he doesn't really like when actors stretch. He wants to see actors, to an extent, he thinks it's the hardest and most interesting to watch an actor be the closest to themselves. And I did not take that as a compliment.
Sorry. So you are not nice.
Directors oftentimes fall in love with, or they identify the actor as the character that they want them to be. And I think we battled this whole movie with, what ostensibly, to an extent, is kind of an archetype or a trope in the Leo Beebe character, who is a bit of an amalgamation of other characters as well. But that, the problem was, how do I not play him as a, snarling villain when his job was to consistently be the conflict? And it was, but reality is great fun, but at the same time, I always had this thing in the back of my head saying, well, I'm not like this. I'm not, so
But you seem so jealous of,
he is jealous.
very much so, of Christian Bale's character,
He
Ken
does
Will.
it. Well, it's exactly that, again.
Like you
because
wanted to screw
the
him.
writing lends itself to truth, which is the idea that scene in the diner between Matt and Christian where he says, these guys hate men like us.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, it does absolutely go to a historical moment in the culture. It goes down to a moment in culture, corporate politics, all
True,
these,
you're right.
It's the wild, free, creative individual who I think a certain kind of person who's got a day-to-day job really sometimes not just looks at with jealousy, but looks at sometimes with rage, of you get to live a life that very few people get to live. And I think Leo Beebe's was even more complicated because I think he somehow really bought into the American identity of this is not the way the country should go, and all these different big complicated things, which is what we tried to key into.
He also has
Thank
sort of a sense of being aware of what things will look like on a PR basis as well. You get the sense that though he doesn't like Ken Miles, that Leo Beebe would have chosen to have all those three Fords come in at the same time, no matter who was driving, because he saw the bigger picture of what was best for the company.
He defended it
Yeah.
for the rest of his life,
Yeah.
just as Carroll Shelby felt bad about asking Miles to slow down for the rest of his life. But he defended it for the rest of his life. Look, one of the main reasons they were there was publicity, and they got it. In answer to your question about laughing and crying in the car, I don't know. I didn't, one of the ways I sort of unburdened myself from thinking about, well, this is the scene where you have to cry, was just to think of the idea that this guy's got the lid on all the time, and so when the lid pops off, it's not crying, it's just emotion, right? It's just expression and emotion and adrenaline, all of it sort of pouring out at the same time. So I didn't think about it in terms of crying per se.
It's also sort of a great parallel in some ways. So they're coming into the movie with such bombast and
Right.
really kind of driving those scenes.
Right.
Yeah. And with the humor also, the kind of a bemused quality I think that you bring.
Sure, no, it's a funny scene on the page as well. So.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
really funny.
We talked for this one more. If anybody has a question, I want to make sure we get in the back. I'm gonna, because this is a movie about. Oh, a question there? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question.
Tracy Les and Josh Lucas, Ford versus Ferrari, opens November 15th. Thank you.
Can I just say hi?
Thank you, guys. Oh, sure. Thank you. Good job. Thanks. I thought the key moment for your character, I'm not sure, like that's it goes back. Yeah. That was more so even than the name is awesome. Yeah. No, I think that was